Hello peeps, it's the Hillbilly Halfwit. How are you today? And today we're going to do something different. I had an email off one of my people watching my channel. There was an old work colleague called John. I won't mention his second name. And he emailed me and he'd seen me on here. And about the time we used to work together, really nice to hear from him. Hadn't seen him for years and years and years and years. And I think he might be coming up to my area for a drink now before long, so I might have a drink with him. But really nice to hear from him. Really good fitter and a machine driver. But I was talking to him. He reminded me about some times when I'd been driving machines and they'd heard some tales about me and Lumper and myself. And he'd reminded me about one where I was driving a harvesting machine similar to this, and somebody was lowering me over a bank because it was so steep with some other machine or something or other. I can't actually remember it because it was literally things like that happening every day. It was so dangerous. You got yourself into such a frame of mind, you would just go anywhere. And I actually found harvesting on flat ground boring, and I used to enjoy harvesting on steep ground. I used to bore me flat ground harvesting. So anyway, what we're going to do, I thought it'd be a good one. I will show you this. By the way, this is my favourite all-time machine I've ever driven of a harvester, Silvertech. Best thing I've ever driven in my life. We had one on demo. So what we're going to do now after this is go through one by one the machines I started off in the forestry with, and what I thought of them, and what I all the way through until I was driving harvesters. I did drive some forwarders, but I haven't got the pictures of the forwarders yet. But I hope you like it. So those of you who haven't been in the forestry, when I started on the forestry when I was in my early teens, I'd probably be about 18 or something like that, maybe 17. I can't remember now. Started working with my mate Lumper, and I was on the saw for a long time and used to cut up. So they would tush. There's a winch on the back of these tractors. This is my all-time favourite skidding tractor, by the way, a County 1124. Man alive! When I got into skidding, this thing was the only tractor of all the counties that you could tie in. You could tush trees out with in high box, because it had so much power and it was really light. Pocket rocket, I loved the thing. But anyway, at the back, there used to be a winch on these, and you had two drums with two ropes on it, and you'd pull the trees to the back, and then you'd drive out to the road, and then they'd drop them on top of these rails, and I'd cut them up by hand and stack them by hand. And you'd have two counties like this coming to you all day long, and stacking everything, logs a lot, by hand. It was hard work, but boy, you got fit by it. So that was a 1124. Now, my first boss I had in the timber, he bought 1124, and it looked exactly like this. He'd bought it from an arable farm. It hadn't had a winch on it, and hadn't been in the wood, and it was beautiful. I can only say it hadn't been knocked about. It was in beautiful condition. And after I'd been with him for a while, I ended up tushing out with one of these, and that's what I learned to tush, which tushing is basically pulling trees up with a tractor, because there was no harvesters and forwarders back then. So I learned to tush with a lad called Bob, or Clive, which is Lumper's brother, and he used to cut the trees off in thin ends, and I used to go up these racks in thin ends and tow them out for him, and that's how I learned to tush. And we tow them down to the bottom of these long racks, we used to call them, which was just wide enough for a tractor to go down a row of trees. And then my boss then used to have a thing called a seifer, which was a machine it had a harvester head on the end, and it just used to take the boughs off. It didn't used to cut them up. So then we'd cut them up afterwards. But that's my favourite ever tushing tractor, that 1124. And I Many years later, he still had that, and I still used to drive it. Used to love every moment driving it with a Duncan cab on. And we also had 1164s. I drove loads of these things, 954s, 1174s, whatever. Once I got touching, I got very good at it. I used to drive them everywhere. I actually forget. Remember, I was at this every day for years and years and years. Now, this is 1164 with Forestry guarding, and it's got a blade on the front and a double drum winch on the back. I drove various ones of these. Some of them we used to put wheel change on the back wheels because we used to go in stupid places, absolutely stupid places. But the wheel change used to rip all the wings off and things like that. So we didn't put wheel chains on if we could help it. But you would winch yourself up places, you drive up places, you come down over stupid places. And it got to a point where Lumper was the best one I've seen on a county. He would go anywhere. He had no fear. But I think all of us have got like that. My friend Andy Peters, he was another one. He ain't got any fear whatsoever. I think we'd all got like that. You just got so used to working on steep ground all the time, you forgot how dangerous it was. Now I moved on from that onto that, which was a John Deere 540B grapple skidder. Now this was the first one around my area, and there wasn't many of them about then, and my boss bought one of them. And I went to drive that then. And what a brilliant machine that was. What a brilliant machine. It only had a 4-cylinder engine, mind, but it had a winch and a grapple on the back. And at the time we were working in the Havern Forest, and in really big ton trees. We had this big patch at a place called Manatlog, and used to have loads of guys falling pole length trees for me, ton trees, and then I'd be towing them out and cutting the logs off on the road and cutting the pulp up and things. There's too many people to mention who I used to work with back then. It was really fun days. Really, really fun days. Really enjoyed that time. And this is another one we had, which these aren't the actual pictures of them. I got these pictures off the internet. They're just random pictures of the machines. We had another one like this, which didn't have a grapple on the back. They had 15-ton winches on, if I remember rightly. And in some of my old stories of where I was tushing from various things and on a bank, and when my mate nearly got dragged over the side, it was on one of these. Fantastic machines. You could go anywhere with them. The only thing that set them back was I rolled one of these onto his cab. Was the back wheel. It was light on the back for some bizarre reason. You had to be very, very careful turning down somewhere without any trees on the back, because that's how I rolled one. She was on a roof and I was sat in it. So they were cracking machines. Loved driving them things. Then we also had one of these. Is a Timberjack 225. This was a decent machine. I never used to like driving these old things. They were the similar machine to the previous one, but it didn't have a steering wheel in. And I don't know, I just never got used to driving them. This one, the ones like these had a power shift transmission in, where you had on the move gear change, like the John Deere tractors at that time. These things just had gearboxes, and they was forever getting stuck in between gears, if I remember correctly, the one I used to drive. I didn't like it, but I drove it a lot, and they would go to some really seriously steep places. And a mate of mine, a lumper, who you know, he was mad as a hatter on one of these. He'd go anywhere. And another mate of mine, Andy from Lanny, was a complete and absolute nutcase on one of these. And I'll tell you a story about that in a separate time when me and him were tushing together. So he was on one of these, and I was on the grapple skidder on this serious steep place. So I'll do that as a funny story before long, but not today. So these were good old machines. If you got a good one, they were reliable, but the one I used to drive was very unreliable. But and used to overheat and things like that. But the one my mate used to drive afterwards, lumper. That was a very reliable machine, to be fair. Now then, of course, things went on then. I went from that to, this was the first harvester I ever drove. This isn't the exact one, it was just a picture of it. Remember, there's a harvester head dangling off the end instead of a bucket on the machines I show now. And they used to grab the trees, cut them down, take the boughs off and cut them up into bits. Everything was done by hand before that. And suddenly the forestry changed so much, everybody went to these machines to make money. Now I went to drive one of these. A mate of mine called Guana, very nicely of him. There was another machine that his boss had bought, which was one of these, a Samsung, a new one, and they were after somebody to go on this, and the machine he was driving, this Ackerman H7, and I went on it. I hadn't been on a harvester before, and I have to be honest, I hated this machine. It was a lumbering, horrible thing to drive, and I really hated it. But that's where I started my harvesting career on. I've never been in such a machine where it was just rocking all the time, and you could not drive the machine without, the levers were moving all the time. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. I hated it. There was no ground clearance. The harvesting head, which was it was a Timberjack A model. It was a crappy machine. I hated driving that thing, but that's where I started it on. So after that, the guy I was working for then, which was Eva Jones, I was driving that for a while, and I have to be honest with you, I got to the point where I was having so much problems with this thing breaking down all the time. I did nearly jack. I hated that machine. But he had an Ackerman EC200 with a 762B Timberjack harvesting head on, not this pecker on the end. And one of my other friends went on holiday, I think he did, and I just happened to be working in the same place in Carno. And basically what they were doing was, there was a really, really steep bank there that you couldn't get a harvester on, and a friend who's passed away now, a really good forwarder driver called Howell, he was bringing them down in the bunk. Mac, another of my mates who I talked about before, was cutting them off with a chainsaw, and then Howell would put them on the back of the machine of the forwarder and drag them about 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 trees down in this forwarder to a track, and then they'd be harvested off by one of these. Now, this was a very lucky thing for me, because I would have probably jacked and I wouldn't have carried on. But what happened was, another friend of mine just happened to go on holiday, and the machine was left there for a couple of weeks, and the timber industry then was so bad, you could not afford to have a machine down. And it was only luckily he said, "Do you fancy going on that for the week?" And I don't think he thought much of me as a harvester driver before that, I got to be honest with you, because I was just broken down all the time. So I said, yeah, go on then. So I went onto this thing, and this was the favourite track machine I ever drove afterwards, out of all the one I drove, because I instantly gelled with this thing. And I was harvesting on that thing. I never had a breakdown. This thing very rarely broke down. It had so much power. It was so smooth. I loved this machine. And the time I was driving that machine, it was a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. And that's what basically I drove and learned to drive a harvester properly on, was one of them. That thing was fantastic. An Ackerman EC200. Probably my favourite harvester I ever drove of a track machine. Loved my time on that. And that's where I learnt my skills at harvester driving, really, on that. Loved my time on that thing. So then, this was the machine I was telling you that Guano moved on to, which was brand new. And they put a 746B head on that, Timberjack. And when they first had it, they had a job setting it up. Because they couldn't get the hydraulic flow to work correctly. But then they managed to do some way of doing it on it, and it was faster than the purpose-built I was driving afterwards. So my friend then, Guana, had moved on somewhere else then. I forget where he went, to another job. And I moved on to this then, because my boss had got rid of this machine, because there's quite a lot of hours on it. But it was oh God, I was sad to see this thing go. I was literally thinking, no, don't sell my baby. But then I went onto this, and this was a 12-ton Samsung machine. And gotta say, loved the thing. Absolutely loved the thing. I was on it for years and years. I don't know how many thousands of hours I did on it. I did everything. I was in stupid situations with these machines going downhill. This thing would go anywhere. I used to put bolt on pieces of what do they call them? Pieces of steel on the track so it could get more grip, about 2 inches, and you bolt on about 4 of them onto the tracks. You would go up some places with that, I tell you. You would shit yourself. You were afraid you'd go over backwards. But another thing, though, this thing would go downhill like no machine I've ever seen before. Some of the places I went downhill with that, you'd have your feet on the windscreen. This thing was the same, mind. The Ackerman was the same, but a cracking machine. I drove that for a long, long time with Eva Jones. Very reliable machine. Cracking machine. Not a bad word to say about it. Oh, sorry, one bad word to say. The rounded windscreen, that was the only thing about it. The windscreen wiper, when it was raining, it didn't clean the window properly. But other than that, fantastic machine. Now, my boss at the time then, he bought one of these, which was a Ponce 8-wheel drive harvester. Now, it wasn't this exact one, but it looked a bit like this. It was one of the first ones that came out. I can't remember the name of it now. But I was driving that for a little bit, not a long time. And I have to say, I didn't drive a huge amount of them, but it was a cracking machine. And a friend I knew who used to drive it, called Dowie, got to say, man alive, this thing would go down some banks. I've never seen a machine like that to go down some bank. He went down a bank one day by the side of me when I was falling timber, and I could not believe where this thing went down. Really good machines, really reliable as well. Only thing is, with the booms on them, they were extending booms, if you can see. That used to extend out about three or four sections. But then the pipes were so long in them, I don't know are they the same now. If you had a burst pipe, it cost a fortune to fix, because the fucking pipe was about 30 foot long. And 30 foot long of pipes like that is, you're pushing like £1,000. So this was another track machine I drove as well, which was a JCB JS200. I drove quite a few of them. Loved the machine, very stable. Didn't get anything wrong with it at all. Nothing. I never put a spanner to that thing. And that had a harvester head on, not that what you see on the end there now. And I think I was with Richard Davis then, I think. A fantastic machine. Not a bad word to say about that. Loved my time on that machine. I was on Silvertech heads then. So that Silvertech was a maker of the heads then. They were a bit antiquated, but they were, compared to the Timberjack heads, they were very basic, but they were reliable, I will say that. And then Daewoo, another track machine I was driving from another boss, Tony. They were good machines as well. The one I used to drive like this used to get overheated a lot, and we were driving in the summer, so I have to be honest, I was a good harvester driver, I'm not going to lie, and I used to push these things hard, like, and this one I was on, there was another guy on it before me, and he never used to have the problems, and then when I went on it, because I was giving it a harder time, it was overheating all the time. And then my boss come there one day, and I'd ripped the bonnet off Chucked it on the ground. I said, it's overeating, it's no good to me. And he was sort of on the verge of being in a mood, but then when he saw how much I'd cut that day, his tune changed and he said, chuck it on the ground. I always remember that. I forget how we got that sorted. It was very hot that year as well. But yeah, in the end, I got it to a point because I was on a shift then with another lad. He would drive it, and I don't know, perhaps he wasn't pushing it as hard as I was. But I used to have to hinge the bonnet up on the one side and put a piece of timber there about a foot diameter to stop the thing overheating with me. Because it didn't have a lot of rest with me, to be fair. Flat out. Anyway, then I went on to my first real purpose-built. I drove that one before I was telling you about, but I only drove that when the lad was on holiday a bit. So I didn't really gel with that thing much. I went on to one of these, which was with Tony, which was a Timberjack 1270B. And really reliable machines. Very light on the back end, I found, though, I have to say. You couldn't... I used to find... People say steep ground harvesting these days and things. If you can drive up it, it's not steep in my... That's how I used to look at the things. If you can drive up it, it's not steep. Everywhere I found steep, you had to go, make your way to the top and come down and just slither your way down. With the back wheels in the air. I got so many tales of driving one of these things. John, I was talking about earlier at the start of the video, I was driving one of these when he was working with us, and he went onto a track machine, a Daewoo track machine. I remember John actually, I'll go back to that. One of these he was driving for Tony, and the engine went on it, and I will never forget, that guy actually took the crank out and things and changed the pistons and rings in one of the cylinders and got that machine going in the wood. Fantastic mechanic. I could not believe it. I'd never seen anybody do that before, but he did it. Fair play to him. He, on his own. One of the pistons and one of the liners had gone, and he did that on his own over a weekend. I always remember it. What a chap. Fair play to him. So I spent years on one of these things, different makes, all kinds of makes. I was driving one with a 4 wheels on as well for a while. That wasn't the best of things. It was quite unstable, but these were very good. They weren't the best things for stability working downhill, but you just got on with it and did your best. Then I went on to one of these, and that was a bit of a game changer. So from one of these, the engine blew in the one I was on of the 1270. I went on to one of these, which is a newer 1270. They had done something different with this. The cab was twisting on these, so when you turned the crane, the cab moved with it. Also, they'd done something with the chassis. I don't know what it was, but it was a lot more stable going downhill. Loved my time on one of these. Never had a bad thing to say about it. Loved my time on it. This was a 1270C, I think it was. C or a D, I forget now. And here we come to my favourite ever machine. We had one on demonstration, a Silvertech. And I couldn't find a photo because I haven't got many photos of my time on the timber. But this thing was fantastic. Out of all the harvesters I've driven, best thing by far. 885 Silvertech Sleipner it was called. Boy, it was pretty. We had this thing on demo. They had no tracks on it. And this thing was making the 1270 look stupid. I was only on it for a couple of weeks, but I was going down places with this, like the side of a house, and it was totally stable. It had a 555 Silvertech head on it, a real big head. Good computer. Loved it. Absolutely loved this machine. I tried to get my boss to buy it, but he didn't buy it, sadly. I wish he had. That was a fantastic machine. Loved my time on that. Really, really nice to drive. Then I went on to one of these, which is this isn't the exact one, but it was a 941. This was a bit of a newer model, but this is a Komatsu. I spent a good bit of time on one of these with the head with the blue top on. So the harvester head then was a Valmet head. The one I drove originally was a demonstration, not a demonstration head, the original head that they were testing in the UK. So they used to come out and test that sort of thing. So I drove that for a while, and that had a crane like this on, if I remember rightly. Yes. And then I was working for a different chap then. Then he had a brand new 911 delivered, and I was on that for a while. Cracking machines. And then I ended up on a 941. Cracking machine, and it didn't have a boom like this on. It had an extender boom, a bit like that previous one. So instead of a knuckle boom, it had an extender boom. That would go to some mental places. And downhill as well. It was stupid places you used to go to. You'd frighten yourself going downhill on the thing. It was a cracking machine. Really loved the layout and things on these machines. I especially loved the hand grips and things on the one I was on, because it had electro-hydraulic controls, but it had wooden levers, a bit like an excavator in it, with little thumb and finger controls. That was the best way. I used to get cramp in the Timberjack ones. Best lever setup I'd seen on anything. Loved my time on one of them. Really enjoyed it. I haven't got a bad word to say about Valmet. Really nice machines. And then I suppose the last stint I had on the harvesters was a 1470 for a friend of mine from Bilth. Drove one of them for quite a while, in wind blow and thin-ins and things like that. Not a bad word to say about it. I think I did some videos with it back. If you go and look at my forestry stuff, you'll see a few videos of me in this one. Cracking machine again, 1470, a bit bigger. I haven't got a bad word to say about it. It was a cracking machine. The cab moved with the crane, so when the crane moved left or right, the cab would go left or right. And it would also level up and things. Plenty of power. Not a bad word to say about it. If you see what I mean, when the crane moves, look, the cab moves like that. So you would think that boom in front of you, and you couldn't see properly, which it is a little bit like that, but in thin-ins, the 1270 was one of the best thin-ins machines I ever drove, because I don't know why, it just was. So in between all this, I drove lots of forwarders and 810 forwarders, 1110 forwarders, various things of forwarders, but I was a harvester man, really. So there we are. I hope you've enjoyed that. I thought it'd be quite interesting for you to see my sort of career of what I used to drive in the forestry. I drove loads of other things as well, but this was my daily job. And I can't do it these days, but I used to love it, and it was a good playing job, and enjoyed every bit of it. So there we are. Please comment, rate and subscribe. All the best, guys.